The shuttle descended through the purple clouds of Station Nexus Prime and Ambassador Kethrix. Nexus Prime and Ambassador Kethrix felt their four stomachs twist with anxiety as they watched through the observation window. The humans were finally here for 3 long cycles to Velnorian. Confederacy had debated whether to even allow these strange creatures into their space. And now that debate was over, and Kethrix had drawn the short straw and been assigned as their official liaison. The intelligence reports sat heavy in Kethrix's mind as they made their way to the docking bay, and every page had been more disturbing than the last. These humans came from a world that seemed designed to kill them at every turn, and yet somehow they had not only survived but thrived and spread across their solar system like a persistent fungus that refused to die. The docking bay doors slid open with a soft hiss, and Kethrix straightened all 6 of their limbs and tried to look dignified as the human shuttle settled onto the landing. Pad steam vented from the ship's engines, and the ramp lowered with a mechanical whine. And then they emerged. There were 5 of them in total, and they moved with an easy confidence that seemed almost reckless given that they were standing in an alien space station surrounded by species that could theoretically tear them apart. Their leader was a broad-shouldered woman with dark hair pulled back from her face, and she wore a simple uniform that bore the insignia of Earth's United Space Command Commander Sarah Chen, according to the briefing files, and she had apparently survived something called a bear attack during her youth, which Kethrix had researched and immediately wished they hadn't. Woman smiled as she approached, and Kethrix had to remind themselves that this baring of teeth was meant as a friendly gesture and not a threat display, even though every instinct screamed otherwise. Ambassador Kethrix, I presume, Chen said, and her voice was warm and pleasant despite the predatory teeth on full display. Commander Chen, Kethrix replied through their translator device, and they extended a single manipulator tendril in the human greeting style they had practiced. The Velnorian Confederacy welcomes Earth's representatives to Station Nexus Prime. Chen grasped the tendril gently, and Kethrix noted with barely concealed alarm how warm her skin was, and the heat radiating from her palm would indicate severe fever in most species, but for humans, this was apparently normal. They ran hot in every sense of the word. Thank you for having us, Chen said, and she released Kethrix's tendril and gestured to her companions. This is my team, and we're looking forward to learning more about the Confederacy. The other humans stepped forward one by one, and there was Lieutenant Park, who specialized in communications, and Dr. Martinez, who served as their medical officer, and Specialists Webb and Okonkwo, who handled security and technical matters respectively. Rick studied each of them carefully and noted how they all shared that same easy confidence and that same subtle awareness of their surroundings that spoke of creatures who had evolved as both predator and prey. I must confess, Commander, Kethrix said as they began, leading the delegation toward the residential quarters. Your species has generated considerable discussion among the Pantheon Council worlds. Chen's expression shifted into something that might have been amusement, and Kethrix was still learning to read human faces. Good things, I hope. Before Kethrix could formulate a suitably diplomatic response, an alarm shrieked through the station, and red warning lights bathed the corridor in crimson as a containment breach warning echoed in 17 different languages. Kethrix felt their blood run cold. Level 9 biohazard. The station's automated voice announced, containment breach in xenobiology laboratory 7, and all personnel must evacuate to designated safe zones immediately. What's happening? Chen asked, and her demeanor had shifted instantly from relaxed diplomat to alert soldier. The xenobiology lab, Kethrix hissed, and all 4 of their eyes widened with genuine terror. Something has escaped, and we must evacuate immediately, Commander. Security officers in sealed hazmat suits rushed past them, heading toward the contamination zone. while other personnel fled in the opposite direction, and the station had descended into controlled. Panic-Chun grabbed a passing officer by the arm, and Kethrix noted how the Kethrian security guard flinched at the human's touch. "What exactly are we dealing with?" Chun demanded. The officer chittered rapidly, and their translators struggled to keep up. "Escape specimen designated Toxicus valaris, and it is one of the most dangerous creatures we have ever cataloged, and its venom causes complete neural shutdown in approximately 0.3 standard cycles." "How long is that in Earth time?" Chun asked. "Approximately 4 of your seconds, Commander." The officer replied, "One sting, and the victim's entire nervous system simply stops functioning, and there is no known antidote and no treatment, and death is instantaneous." Kethrix watched Chun's face carefully, expecting to see the fear that any rational being would display upon learning such information instead. The human's brow furrowed in confusion. "What does this creature look like?" Chun asked. The officer's antennae flattened against their head in obvious distress. "It is a small wind creature, approximately 2 centimeters in length, with distinctive striped coloration in patterns of yellow and black. And it produces a droning sound when it flies, and—" "Hold on," Chum said, and she held up one hand, and Kethrix could see something strange happening on her face. "Are you describing a bee?" The officer recoiled as if Chun had struck them. "You know of this creature." "Know of it," Chun said, and there was an odd sound in her voice that Kethrix would later learn was barely suppressed. "Laughter. Commander, we need to." But before anyone could finish speaking, a familiar sound filled the corridor, a soft buzzing drone that made every alien in the vicinity freeze in absolute terror. Kethrix pressed themselves against the wall and calculated the distance to the nearest emergency seal as the tiny yellow and black form drifted lazily through the air. Delegates screamed and scattered in every direction, and security officers fumbled with weapons that seemed suddenly inadequate. And Kethrix prepared to witness the death of Earth's first official ambassador to the Confederacy. The bee landed on Commander Sarah Chun's bare arm. Kethrix stopped breathing entirely and watched in frozen horror as the human looked down at the D creature perched on her exposed skin. Its stinger was clearly visible, and one injection would flood her system with enough neurotoxin to kill a Valnorian 12 times over, and this was it. And this was how the diplomatic relationship between Earth and the Confederacy would end before it had even truly begun. Commander Chun smiled. She actually smiled at the tiny instrument of death sitting on her arm, and then she did something that would haunt Kethrix nightmares for years to come. She gently cupped her other hand over the bee like it was a precious thing, and she walked calmly toward an air vent near the ceiling, and she spoke to it in soft tones. "Hey there, little guy," she said. "Are you lost, and did you get out of your containment?" "Somehow." And then she released it into the ventilation shaft, and the bee disappeared into the station systems, and the corridor fell into stunned, disbelieving silence. Commander Kethrix finally managed to say, "That creature's venom is lethal. And you just touched it with your bare hands." Chun shrugged, and it was such a casual gesture, and so utterly unconcerned that Kethrix felt their understanding of the universe shift slightly. "Yeah, I'm actually mildly allergic," Chun said. "I get a bit of swelling and maybe some itching, and nothing my medkit couldn't handle, though." She smiled again, and this time Kethrix barely noticed the teeth. "Back home we call that an allergy." The news spread through Station Nexus Prime like wildfire through dry grass, and within 3 hours, every single being on the station knew what Commander Sarah Chun had done. Kethrix found themselves fielding communications from 17 different species ambassadors before the day cycle was even half finished, and each conversation followed the same pattern of disbelief and horror and morbid fascination. The human touched it. The Morvian ambassador asked, and their gelatinous form rippled with emotions that Kethrix couldn't quite identify with her bare manipulators. "She cupped it in her hands," Kethrix confirmed, "and she spoke to it gently, and she called it cute." The Morvian ambassador was silent for a long moment, and Kethrix could see them processing this information and struggling to fit it into their understanding of how the universe worked. Cute, the ambassador finally repeated. She called a creature capable of killing her in 4 seconds cute. She did, and she survived without any medical intervention whatsoever. And she returned to her quarters and ate something called a sandwich, and took what she referred to as a nap. The Morvian ambassador ended the communication without another word, and Kethrix suspected they needed time to process what they had learned. Meanwhile, Commander Chun had become an unwitting celebrity among the station's population, and everywhere she went she attracted stares and whispers and the occasional brave soul who wanted to speak with her directly. One such brave soul was a young Kethrian researcher named Vix, who worked in the xenobiology department that had accidentally released the deadly specimen in the first place. Vix had attached themselves to the human delegation with a determination that bordered on obsession, and they followed Commander Chun through the station's corridors, peppering her with questions. "Your species truly coexists with Toxicus veloris?" Vix asked, and their antennae quivered with academic excitement. Chen laughed, and it was a warm sound that Kethrix was beginning to find less alarming. "We don't just coexist with them, and we actually keep them on purpose." Vix stopped walking, and Kethrix, who had been accompanying them, nearly collided with the young researcher. "You keep them," Vix repeated deliberately. "We've been beekeeping for thousands of years," Chun explained, and she seemed genuinely pleased to share this information. "Bees pollinate our food crops, and they make honey, which we eat, and they're actually really important to our ecosystem." "You eat their secretions," Vix said, and their voice had gone slightly higher than normal. "Honey is delicious, and you should try it sometime." Kethrix made a mental note to never try honey under any circumstances. Vix's mandibles clicked rapidly as they processed this information, and Kethrix recognized the signs of someone whose entire worldview was being fundamentally restructured. "And the venom," Vix asked, "does it not affect your species at all?" Chun tilted her head in thought. "Well, if you're allergic, it can be serious, and some people can go into anaphylactic shock, which can be life-threatening if you don't get treatment fast enough. So it can kill humans," Vix said. And they seemed almost relieved to hear this. "Sure, in rare cases, but most people just get a little bump, and it hurts for a few minutes, and then you move on with your day and forget it ever happened." "A little bump," Vix repeated faintly. Chun seemed to realize she was causing distress, and her expression softened. "Look, I understand this is a lot to take in, and Earth is kind of intense compared to most worlds, and we've got all sorts of venomous creatures." "All sorts?" Kethrix asked, and they immediately regretted speaking up. "Oh yeah," Chun said, and she started counting on her fingers. "We've got venomous snakes and venomous spiders and venomous jellyfish and scorpions and centipedes and even a venomous mammal or two, and the bee isn't even in our top 50 most dangerous animals, honestly." Vix excused themselves abruptly, and Kethrix suspected they needed to go update the Confederacy's threat assessment files regarding humanity. Chun watched them go with a bemused expression. "It's something I said, Commander," Kethrix said carefully. "I believe you may be underestimating how unusual your species appears to the rest of the galaxy." "How so?" Kethrix considered their words carefully and decided that honesty was probably the best approach with these humans. Most species evolve on worlds that are relatively stable and relatively safe, and the dangers we face tend to be predictable and avoidable, and we adapt to our environments, and our environments accommodate us in return. Chun nodded. "That sounds nice, actually. Your world," Kethrix continued, "appears to be actively hostile to all life that exists upon it, and yet your species not only survived, but dominated and spread and developed technology and reached for the stars. And now you stand here, treating a creature that could kill most beings in seconds, like it was a lost pet." Chun was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was thoughtful. I never really thought about it that way, and I guess we just adapted to what we had, and you don't really question it when it's all you've ever known. That adaptability, Kethrick said, is precisely what makes you so frightening to us. Chun's expression shifted into something complicated, and Kethrick's thought they might have detected a hint of sadness there. We don't want to frighten anyone, Ambassador, and we just want to make friends and trade and learn and explore, and we're not here to cause trouble. I believe you, Commander, and I genuinely do, and that's what frightens me most of all. Chun raised an eyebrow. I don't follow. If your species is this formidable when you're trying to be friendly, Kethrick said, then I cannot imagine what you must be like when you're trying to be hostile. Chun was silent for a long moment, and her dark eyes studied Kethrick's with an intensity that made the ambassador want to flee. You're right to be cautious. Chun finally said, humans can be dangerous when we need to be, and I won't pretend otherwise, and our history has plenty of darkness in it. Then why should we trust you? Chun smiled, and this time it didn't show her teeth, because that same history taught us something important. Ambassador, and we learned that cooperation beats conflict every time in the long run, and we learned that making friends is better than making enemies, and we learned that the universe is too big and too wonderful to waste our time fighting over it. She placed a hand on Kethrick's upper limb, and the warmth of her touch was startling, but not unpleasant. We came here in peace, she said, and we mean to keep it that way, and all we're asking is for a chance to prove ourselves. Kethrick looked at this strange, warm-blooded creature who could handle deadly, venomous insects without flinching, and who came from a world that seemed designed as a death trap, and who somehow still believed in friendship and peace and cooperation. I think, Kethrick said slowly, that I would like to give you that chance. 2 weeks had passed since the incident with the bee, and the galaxy had not stopped talking about it. Kethrick had given up trying to manage the flow of information and instead simply watched as humanity's reputation evolved from unknown newcomers to the most fascinating and terrifying species anyone had ever encountered. The xenobiology department had become particularly obsessed with cataloging Earth's various dangers, and Vix had taken personal charge of the project and their research. Had produced a document that was currently circulating through every scientific institution in the Confederacy. Rick had made the mistake of reading it. The document was titled Preliminary Assessment of Terran Hazards, and it ran to over 300 pages, and Kethrick had only made it through the first 50 before they needed to stop and lie down in a dark room for several hours. Section on Australian fauna alone had given them nightmares. Commander Chun had taken to holding informal question and answer sessions in the station's common areas, and beings from dozens of different species would gather to listen to her describe life on Earth with a mixture of horror and fascination. Today's session was particularly well attended. So, this creature, a Morvian delegate asked, this spider you call the Black Widow, and it lives in your dwellings? Sometimes. Yeah, Chun said. They like dark, quiet places like garages and sheds and closets. And you just have to be careful where you put your hands. And its bite can be pretty nasty and potentially fatal if you don't get treatment, but deaths are actually pretty rare and most people recover fully. The Morvian made a sound that their translator rendered as inconceivable, a Kethrian. Scientist raised a manipulator limb. What about the creature called the box jellyfish? And is it true that its venom can kill in minutes? That one's no joke, actually, Chun admitted. Box jellyfish are genuinely dangerous, and their sting is extremely painful and potentially lethal, and we teach children in certain regions to watch for them when swimming. Children swim in waters that contain these creatures. The scientist asked, well, yeah, and the ocean is right there, and you can't just not swim in it. Kethrick noticed that several beings in the audience were quietly excusing themselves, and they suspected another round of threat. Assessment updates would be circulating soon. Dr. Martinez, the human medical officer, had joined Chun today, and she added her own perspective. The thing you have to understand is that humans evolved alongside these creatures, Martinez explained. Our immune systems developed responses to various venoms and toxins over millions of years, and what might be instantly lethal to your species might just make us sick for a few days, or not affect us at all, Chun added. I've been stung by bees probably a dozen times in my life, and the worst case was some swelling and itching for a week. You've been stung multiple times, Vix asked from the front row where they had claimed a permanent seat. And you continued to coexist with them. Well, yeah, and they weren't trying to hurt me, and bees only sting when they feel threatened, and usually it's because you accidentally got too close to their hive or stepped on one or something, and it's not personal. Vix's antennae twitched rapidly. You assign emotional motivation to venomous insects. I mean, they're just trying to protect their home, right? And I can respect that. The session continued for another hour and covered topics ranging from venomous snakes to poisonous plants to something called poison oak that could cause severe skin reactions from mere contact. By the end, Cathrix noticed that the audience had thinned considerably, and only the bravest or most academically curious remained. After the crowd dispersed, Chan approached Cathrix with a thoughtful expression. Ambassador, can I ask you something? Of course, Commander. All these questions about dangerous animals and venomous creatures, and I'm getting the sense that maybe I'm not helping humanity's case here, and maybe I should be focusing on the nicer aspects of Earth. Cathrix considered the question carefully. What would you consider the nicer aspects? Chan's face lit up. Oh, there's so much beauty on Earth. And we have incredible mountains and vast oceans and forests that stretch for thousands of kilometers. And we have animals that aren't dangerous at all. Like dogs. Dogs, Cathrix repeated, and they vaguely remembered something from the intelligence briefings. These are the domesticated wolves, yes. Well, technically yes, but they're not like wolves anymore, and they're friendly and loyal, and they love unconditionally. And they've been humanity's companions for tens of thousands of years. You domesticated apex predators and made them your companions. Chun seemed to realize her mistake. Okay, maybe dogs aren't the best example. What else? Cats, and we have cats, and they're small and fuzzy and cute. The intelligence files describe them as ambush predators with retractable claws and specialized hunting instincts. Chun sighed. Okay. Look, I'm starting to realize that maybe Earth doesn't have as many non-threatening species as I thought. Cathrix felt something unexpected, and it took them a moment to identify it as amusement. Commander, I appreciate your efforts to present your homeworld in a positive light, but I think perhaps you should simply be honest about what Earth is like. Even if the honesty scares everyone, the truth will emerge eventually, and it's better that it comes from you directly than through rumors and speculation, and at least this way you can provide context. Chun nodded slowly. I guess that makes sense, and there's no point pretending we're something we're not. Precisely, and besides, Cathrix added, I've been observing you and your team for 2 weeks now, and whatever Earth may have produced in terms of dangerous flora and fauna, it also produced beings capable of great kindness and curiosity and warmth. Chun's expression softened. Thank you, Ambassador, and that means a lot. You're welcome, Commander, and now if you'll excuse me, I need to go reassure the Morvian delegation that humans are not planning to weaponize box jellyfish. Chun laughed, and the sound echoed through the corridor, warm and genuine, and utterly unafraid. Cathrix found themselves thinking that perhaps humanity's fearlessness was not something to be frightened of after all. Perhaps it was something to admire, perhaps it was even something to aspire to. The Grand Council Chamber of the Velnorian Confederacy was an impressive space that could seat representatives from all 47 member species, and today every single seat was filled the topic of discussion was humanity's formal petition for associate membership in the Confederacy, and the debate had been raging for 6 standard hours with no end in sight. Kethrix sat in the observer's gallery alongside Commander Chung and her team and watched as ambassador after ambassador rose to speak their piece. "We cannot admit a species that cultivates deadly organisms," the Morvian representative declared, and their gelatinous form pulsed with emphasis. "It speaks to a fundamental instability in their psychology. They don't merely cultivate them," the Catherine delegate added. "They consume the secretions produced by these venom bearers, and they call it honey, and they feed it to their young." A wave of disgusted murmurs swept through the chamber. Furthermore, the delegate continued, "Our research indicates that honey is not the only dangerous substance humans willingly consume, and they regularly ingest a compound called capsaicin, which triggers pain receptors and causes burning sensations. And they do this because they enjoy it. They also consume fermented plant matter that impairs cognitive function." Another delegate chimed in. "They call it alcohol, and it is literally poison, and they drink it at celebrations." Commander Chun leaned toward Kethrix. "Is this going well or badly?" "And I genuinely can't tell. I am also uncertain," Kethrix admitted. The Dravian ambassador rose to speak, and their 4 wings folded neatly against their thorax. "I wish to raise a point of order, and all of this discussion of humanity's unusual dietary habits and coexistence with dangerous fauna misses the larger question, which is," the council chair prompted, "can they be trusted? And I do not ask whether they are dangerous, because clearly they are, and I ask whether they will choose to be dangerous to us or whether they will be our allies." The chamber fell silent, and Kethrix felt a shift in the atmosphere. And finally someone had asked the question that truly mattered. "Ambassador Kethrix," the chair said, "you have spent the most time with the human delegation, and what is your assessment?" Kethrix rose slowly and felt the weight of 47 species' attention pressing down upon them. "Honored colleagues, I have spent 3 weeks studying humanity and observing their behavior and learning about their homeworld, and I will not pretend that what I learned was not disturbing." They paused and gathered their thoughts. "Earth is a world of extremes, and its creatures are adapted for survival in conditions that would kill most beings, and the humans themselves are perhaps the most extreme adaptation of all." Kethrix activated a holographic display, and images began flickering across the chamber's main screen. "They climb frozen mountains for recreation, and they call it fun." The image showed humans scaling a peak of ice and rock with nothing but ropes and determination. They swim in oceans filled with apex predators, and they build beaches next to waters where creatures hunt. The image shifted to show humans splashing in waves while shark fins cut through the water in the distance. They run across burning deserts, and they call it a marathon, and they compete to see who can do it fastest. Gasps echoed through the chamber as the image showed humans racing through a landscape of scorching sand. They expose themselves to their star's radiation deliberately because they find the resulting skin coloration aesthetically pleasing, and they call it tanning. "This is madness," someone called out. Perhaps Kethrix acknowledged, "But consider what this madness means, and consider what kind of species emerges from such a crucible." They changed the image again, and this time it showed something different, and it showed humans helping each other and carrying the wounded and sharing food and building shelters together. Humans evolved on a world that tried to kill them at every turn, and instead of becoming cruel and selfish in response, they became cooperative and caring, and they formed bonds with each other. And they even formed bonds with the predators that shared their world. The image showed a human child sleeping peacefully next to what was clearly a wolf descendant, and the creature's eyes were gentle, and its posture was protective. They domesticated wolves, Kethrix said, not through cruelty or domination, but through mutual benefit and trust, and those wolves became dogs, and those dogs became family. They call them good boys. Vix added helpfully from somewhere in the gallery. The chamber buzzed. With confused murmurs, "My point," Kethrix continued, "is that humans are indeed dangerous and terrifying in many ways, but they are also capable of profound loyalty and compassion, and they form attachments quickly, and they defend those attachments fiercely. And if we reject them," the Dravian ambassador asked, "what then?" "Then we make enemies of a species that survives by adapting, and we make enemies of beings who shrug off venom that would kill us in seconds. And we make enemies of creatures who look at death and say, 'Not today.'" Kethrix let that sink in before continuing. "But if we accept them, and if we offer them friendship and alliance and partnership, then we gain companions who will walk through fire for those they care about. And we gain allies who do not know how to give up." The chamber was silent, Commander. Chun rose from her seat, and the council chair nodded permission for her to speak. "I know we seem frightening to you," Chun said, and her voice was calm and sincere. "Our world is harsh, and we evolved to match it, and I can't change that. And I wouldn't want to, because that harshness made us who we are." She looked around the chamber, meeting eyes and sensors and optical clusters from dozens of different species. "But that same resilience that lets us shrug off bee stings and swim with sharks and climb frozen mountains is the same resilience that makes us loyal friends, and it makes us persistent allies, and it makes us the kind of people who don't abandon those we care about no matter how hard things get." She smiled, and this time she didn't hide her teeth. "We're not asking you to understand us, and we're just asking for a chance to prove ourselves, and give us that chance, and I promise you won't regret it." The vote was called, and for a long moment the outcome seemed uncertain. Then the results appeared on the display: 31 in favor and 12 opposed, and 4 abstaining. Humanity had been granted associate membership in the Valnorian Confederacy. Chun turned to Kethrix with tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you, Ambassador, and I won't forget what you did today." "Don't thank me yet, Commander," Kethrix replied. "Associate membership comes with responsibilities, and now you must prove that my faith in your species was justified." Chun straightened her spine and squared her shoulders, and Kethrix saw in her posture the same determination that had allowed her ancestors to survive a world that wanted them dead. "We will," she said. "I promise." 6 months had passed since humanity's acceptance into the Confederacy, and the relationship had been progressing smoothly with cultural exchanges and trade negotiations and scientific collaborations. Then the distress signal came. Kethrix was in their quarters when the alert sounded, and they rushed to the command center to find chaos unfolding across multiple screens. The colony on Meridian 7 had experienced a catastrophic seismic event, and the earthquake had ruptured the settlements. Atmospheric containment systems and now toxic gases were flooding into the habitation zones. 3,000 souls lived on Meridian 7, and most of them were Morvian colonists, with some Cathrian scientists and a handful of other species. All of them were dying. "What's the atmospheric composition?" the emergency coordinator demanded. "Hydrogen sulfide at lethal concentrations," a technician reported, "along with sulfur dioxide and trace amounts of ammonia, and the levels are rising, and at current rates the entire colony will be uninhabitable within 12 hours. Evacuation status: impossible, sir, and the landing pads are in the contaminated zone, and any rescue craft that approaches will be flooded with toxic gas before they can land." Kethrix felt their hearts sink, and they had 4 hearts, and all of them were breaking. The mathematics were simple and terrible, and no species in the Confederacy could survive long enough in that atmosphere to repair the containment breaches, and by the time the gases dispersed naturally, everyone would be dead. "There must be something we can do," someone said. "We've run every simulation." The coordinator replied, "No species we know of can work in those conditions, and the exposure would be fatal. Within minutes, humans can." The voice came from the doorway, and Kethrix turned to see Commander Chun standing there with her team behind her. "What did you say?" the coordinator asked Chun. stepped forward, and her expression was calm and determined. Hydrogen sulfide and sulfur dioxide and ammonia. And that's nasty stuff, but humans can work in it. The concentrations would kill you. Not immediately, and not with the right equipment, and we have respirators and protective gear, and we've trained. For toxic environment operations, and some of our people work in worse conditions on Earth. Dr. Martinez stepped up beside her commander. The exposure limits for humans are much higher than for most species, and we can rotate teams and cycle through the hot zone and keep our exposure within manageable levels. Manageable, the coordinator repeated. What does manageable mean? It means we'll get sick. Chun said bluntly. Some of us might get very sick, and I'm not going to pretend there's no risk. But we can do this, and we can seal those breaches, and we can save those people. The room fell silent. Kethrix looked at this human, who had once held a deadly bee in her bare hands and called it cute, and now she was volunteering to walk into a cloud of poison to save 3,000 strangers. Commander, Kethrix said. These colonists and they rejected humanity's membership bid, and the Morvians voted against you. Chun shrugged. So what? So why would you risk your lives for them? Chun's expression softened, and she met Kethrix's S4 eyes with her own too. Because they need help and because we can provide it, and that's all that matters. Ambassador, she turned back to the coordinator. How long do we have? 12 hours at most. Then let's not waste any more time. The mission was approved within the hour, and by the time the human shuttle touched down on Meridian 7, the situation had grown even more dire. Kethrix watched the operation unfold from the command center, and every moment felt like an eternity. The human team worked in shifts, and they would enter the contaminated zone and work for 30 minutes at a time and then rotate out and rest while the next team went in. The feeds from their helmet cameras showed hellish conditions, and yellow-green gases swirled through corridors, and visibility was measured in meters. And the humans pushed through it all. Chun led from the front, as Kethrix had somehow known she would, and she coordinated her team with calm efficiency, and she never once complained about the conditions. Breach Alpha sealed. A voice reported over the comm. Moving to Breach Beta. Copy that, and Team 2 prepare for rotation. Hour after hour the humans worked, and the colonists huddled in emergency shelters, and waited and prayed to whatever gods they believed in. Kethrix found themselves offering prayers of their own to deities they hadn't thought about in years. The operation took 19 hours. 19 hours of humans cycling through toxic environments, and sealing breaches and running emergency repairs and fighting against the clock. When the final breach was sealed, and the atmospheric systems began scrubbing the poison from the air, a ragged cheer went up in the command center. All 3,000 colonists had survived. The human team returned to Station Nexus Prime the following day, and Kethrix made certain to be at the docking bay. When they arrived, they looked terrible. Commander Chun's face was pale, and her eyes were red, and she moved with the careful slowness of someone whose body was fighting off poison. 2 of her team members had to be carried off the shuttle on stretchers, but they were all alive, and they were all smiling. The corridors of the station were lined with beings from every species in the Confederacy, and they had come to witness the return of the humans who had walked into poison for strangers, stepped forward, and performed a gesture of profound gratitude, and it was a motion reserved for those who had risked everything to save lives. You walked into poison, Kethrix said, for people who voted against you, and for people you had never met, and for people who called you dangerous and frightening. Chun's voice was rough and raspy from the exposure, but her smile was warm. That's what allies do, Ambassador. The Morvian ambassador pushed through the crowd, and their gelatinous form was trembling with emotion. Commander Chun, they said, I spoke against your species, and I called you unstable and dangerous, and I was wrong. You weren't entirely wrong, Chun replied. We are dangerous when we need to be, but we choose who we're dangerous for. The ambassador extended a pseudopod in the human style of greeting. Thank you, and thank you for saving my people." Chun took the offered appendage and shook it gently. "You're welcome, and I hope this means we can be friends now. More than friends. Commander and the Morvian delegation will be proposing humanity's elevation to full membership." At the next council session, a murmur of approval rippled through the assembled crowd. Cathrix watched as Chen was surrounded by grateful colonists and impressed diplomats and curious scientists who all wanted to shake her hand and thank her and understand how her species had done the impossible. And Cathrix remembered that day 6 months ago when a tiny bee had landed on Chun's arm and she had smiled and called it cute. They had been frightened of the wrong things all along. Humanity wasn't frightening because they could survive bee stings and toxic gases and frozen mountains and burning deserts. Humanity was remarkable because despite all of that, and despite coming from a world that tried to kill them every single day, they still chose to be kind. They still chose to help. They still chose to walk into hell for strangers. As the years passed, a saying spread through the Confederacy, and it passed between species who had once feared these strange warm creatures from the deadly third planet. If you want something killed, send a Kethrian. And if you want something built, send a Morvian. But if you want something survived, and if you want someone to walk into hell and drag your people out alive, you send a human. And somewhere in the galaxy, a human probably sneezed and shrugged it off and went back to helping someone in need, because that's what humans do. The end.